She vanished mid-performance. No one saw her leave, and no one saw her again. Welcome to Agent Ash. I am your host, Hallow. This growing community is amazing. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from today. Hearing from you always brightens my day. Let's dive in. The velvet curtain fell in silence. There was no applause, only a stunned hush that swept across the gilded interior of the Théâtre Belle Étoile, rippling through rows of sequined gowns and crisp tuxedos, like a sudden breeze through tall reeds. For a moment, the audience sat suspended in disbelief, frozen somewhere between illusion and something more troubling. She had vanished. Celeste Allard, the prima ballerina of Les Étoiles de Minuit, had leapt impossibly high in the finale of La Danse de l'Ombre, a final grand jeté that had drawn gasps even before her slippers touched the velvet stage. Except they never did. She was gone. No trapdoor, no smoke, no clever distraction. One moment the girl was mid-air, her white costume billowing like a swan's final breath. The next, nothing. A ghost in spotlight. Backstage, confusion reigned. The stagehands were shouting. The conductor had halted the orchestra mid-measure. A man in a tailcoat stood and called out, "Is this part of the performance?" His voice trembled slightly. It was not. From the royal box, Lady Eugenia Charpentier leaned forward with narrowed eyes. She was not easily impressed, nor easily startled. Beside her, her husband, Lord Benedict Charpentier, already clutching his opera glasses, was whispering something sharp and unpleasant under his breath. Below, in the fifth row near the center aisle, a small, fastidious man adjusted his cuffs. His moustache, so perfect as to appear painted, did not so much as twitch. "Monsieur Poirot," came the voice beside him, a deep murmur from his friend, Captain Arthur Hastings. "Surely you saw that too." "I did, Hastings. I did indeed." Poirot's dark eyes remained fixed on the stage. "And I do not believe Mademoiselle Allard's disappearance was an act of art. Non, mon ami, I believe it was an act of something far less beautiful." Hastings blinked. "You mean a crime?" Poirot tilted his head slightly, the lights above catching the gleam of his patent shoes. "I mean, my friend, that a woman has vanished into thin air, and magic," he said softly, "is often the first refuge of the guilty." Within 20 minutes, the theatre had been emptied of all but staff, performers, and an increasingly agitated police inspector named Varron, whose handlebar moustache seemed to bristle with anxiety. "She must have run off," Varron barked, pacing the wings of the stage with his coat flapping. "You artists, always dramatic. A publicity stunt, no doubt. She'll turn up in a day with some story to sell to the papers." "No, Inspector," said Madame Lavigne, the director of the company. She was a handsome woman in her 60s, draped in a shawl the color of aged parchment. Celeste would never do such a thing. This role was everything to her. Everything. Poirot stepped forward delicately. "Pardon, Inspector Varron. Might I examine the wings myself? I understand the girl had no known history of illness or despair." "Quite the opposite," Madame Lavigne added quickly. "Celeste was ambitious, fiercely so. She was meant to sign with the Royal Ballet next season. Her dreams were just beginning." Varron groaned. "And yet here we are, an empty stage and 1,000 rumors waiting to take flight." "Then let us be precise," said Poirot gently, his voice as calm and crisp as a new cufflink. "I do not chase rumors. I trace movements, small movements. That is where the truth hides." The area behind the curtain was a labyrinth of ropes, pulleys, and backdrops. A few dancers lingered, whispering with pale faces and wide eyes. Poirot's gaze fell on the stage floor, the center mark of Celeste's final leap. "No trapdoor here," he murmured. "Not even a scuff to betray a sudden descent. Curious. Could someone have caught her, Hastings asked, following him closely. Not without being seen, Poirot said, lifting a delicate hand. She was alone, in light. She did not descend, Hastings. She did not fall. She simply ceased to be. That night, Poirot was not able to sleep. He sat in his room at the Hotel Le Phénix, staring out at the Seine, watching its dark surface break apart the golden reflections of the city lights. Celeste Allard had not simply vanished. That was impossible. And Poirot did not believe in the impossible. He believed in people, in motives, in secrets. In the morning, the rumors bloomed like flowers after a storm. Some whispered of love affairs, of stage rivalries, of a fortune left behind. Others swore they'd seen a man in black slip beneath the stage with a velvet satchel only minutes before the final act. Still others said she had discovered something, a letter perhaps, or a photograph, that had put her in someone's way. Poirot, however, believed nothing, not yet. He believed only in order. And so he penned a note to Inspector Varin and another to Madame Lavigne, requesting a formal gathering of all involved in the production, dancers, directors, financiers, and guests of note, at the theatre the following afternoon. "There is too much noise," Poirot said to Hastings, smoothing the lapel of his grey suit. "And where there is noise, there is always the risk of overlooking what is truly important." Hastings lifted a brow. "And what's that?" "The silence," Poirot replied. "The silence that always follows a carefully staged act." He turned away from the window, brushing an invisible speck from his sleeve. "It is time, Hastings, to listen not to what was said, but to what was not said, and in doing so, we shall find the truth of the disappearing dancer." The Théâtre Belle Étoile felt different by daylight. Its chandeliers, once dazzling and glorious in the dark, now hung like pale skeletons in the morning sun. The stage, stripped of illusion, looked merely wooden and tired. But Hercule Poirot, ever exact, was pleased by the clarity the day provided. He arrived promptly at 1 o'clock, his grey suit spotless, his pocket square a sharp triangle of white. He had already visited the stage floor once again in the quiet hours of morning, and confirmed what he suspected. There was no technical explanation for the girl's disappearance. No mechanism, no device, no theatrical sleight. It was human, it was planned, and it was clever. He was greeted in the lobby by Madame Lavigne, her eyes red with fatigue, but her posture ramrod straight. "They're all here, Monsieur Poirot," she said, "as you requested, the cast, crew, and a few others." "Merci, you are most kind." Poirot gave a polite bow. "And you yourself, madame, you were acquainted with all of them intimately, no?" "Yes," she said, folding her arms. "I built this company. They're like family to me." Poirot said gently. "But even families have secrets, no?" He entered the main salon, where the group had gathered around a semicircle of chairs hastily arranged before the stage apron. Hastings was already there, watching the group with furrowed brows, his notepad in hand, though Poirot knew Hastings rarely took notes, unless asked. He preferred to observe, as he said, with instinct. Poirot admired the loyalty, if not the methodology. The room buzzed faintly with nerves. Seated in one corner, her arms tightly crossed, was a sullen-looking ballerina with a curtain of black hair, Elise Moreau. She had been Celeste's understudy. Next to her lounged Etienne Laval, the principal danseur, dashing and arrogantly composed, his long legs crossed with theatrical ease. Beside him was Claude Leroux, the company's technical director, a man of few words and fewer expressions. He sat bolt upright, his hands on his knees, glancing often toward the stage rigging. A little to the left sat Delphine Laurent, Celeste's dresser and closest friend in the troupe, chewing her thumbnail anxiously. Opposite her was Maurice Caron, the financier of the production, who wore an expensive suit and a look of public disdain that barely concealed private panic. Finally, In a crimson chair near the edge sat Lord Benedict Charpentier, arms folded over his ample stomach, his wife notably absent. Poirot made a mental note of that detail. Lady Eugenia had been the one watching most closely last night, and yet today she had declined to appear. Poirot stood before them all and clicked his heels softly. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said, bowing his head, "I thank you for your time. As you know, a most strange and troubling event occurred during last evening's performance. Mademoiselle Celeste Allard vanished, not in metaphor or flourish, but in truth. She has not been found, and I do not believe she left of her own volition." There was a murmur, the sort that ripples just before denial. "I will speak with each of you individually," Poirot continued. "But first, I will ask a few brief questions. You may answer or remain silent, but I urge you, what you choose to hide, I will uncover in time." He turned first to Elise Moreau. "Mademoiselle," he said, "you were Celeste's understudy, were you not?" She lifted her chin. "Yes." "And yet you did not perform last night." "I wasn't scheduled. Celeste was fit and performing." Poirot studied her face. A flicker of something, resentment, fear, flitted across her brow and vanished just as quickly. "You were close?" "She kept to herself," Elise said shortly. "Did she confide in you? Express fears? What worries?" "No," Elise said. "Celeste didn't share anything. She only cared about the spotlight." Poirot gave a small nod, as if this confirmed something. Perhaps it did. He turned to Etienne Laval, who smiled faintly, as though the entire affair were a rehearsal he hadn't prepared for. "Monsieur Laval, you danced with Mademoiselle Allard in last night's performance. You were on stage with her before her final leap." "I was," Etienne said, his voice low and smooth. "She landed the pirouette perfectly. The leap was the last beat of the performance. I turned toward the back as planned. When I looked again, she was gone. No unusual tension between you?" He gave a small shrug. "She was intense, but brilliant. We clashed sometimes, but that's the art. We all want to be seen." Poirot tilted his head slightly. "Indeed. And did she seem troubled yesterday?" Etienne's gaze flickered. Just a beat too long. "I suppose she seemed distracted." Poirot moved on. "Madame Delphine," he said gently to the woman chewing her nails. "You were her dresser. Her confidant, perhaps." I guess. She told me things sometimes," Delphine said. "She'd been getting letters, weird ones." Poirot's eyebrows rose. "Letters?" "Yes. At first she said they were from a secret admirer, but then she started locking them away. They made her nervous." "Did you read any of them?" "No," she said, swallowing. "She hid them in her dressing room, bottom drawer, behind the tights." Poirot made a mental note. His gaze swept to Claude Leroux. "Monsieur Leroux, you supervise all stage mechanics?" "I do." "And you swear there is no device, no lever or trick that could explain such a disappearance?" He nodded once, tight. "Absolutely. That stage is solid. No trapdoors. I checked it myself after the curtain fell." "Any access from below?" "Number the Undercroft is sealed. Been that way since the renovation in 1931. Poirot nodded, then turned to Caron. "Monsieur Caron, you funded the production?" "Indeed," the financier said, with a forced calm. "A great deal of money, I might add. And this disappearance, it troubles you greatly, non?" "It destroys us," Caron snapped. "Ticket sales, reputation. We've already had cancellations this morning." "Do you insure the company's assets?" "I insure everything," Caron said, "including the principal dancers." There was a beat of silence. "You insured Mademoiselle Allard?" Poirot asked softly. "Of course," Caron said, though his voice was suddenly lower. "She was our star." "How recently?" "A month ago," he replied. "Standard practice when we began the Paris season." Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly, then shifted to Lord Charpentier. "Your lordship, may I ask, were you and Lady Eugenia acquainted with Celeste Allard?" "Barely," Lord Charpentier huffed. "My wife admired her dancing, thought she had promise. I found her rather full of herself. And yet you were here, in the theatre, at her final performance." "A favour to my wife," he muttered. Poirot inclined his head graciously. "I thank you all for your candour," he said. "I shall speak to each of you again. But for now, I must examine the dressing-room of Mademoiselle Allard." He turned on his heel and signalled quietly to Hastings. As they walked toward the rear corridors, Poirot said in a hushed voice, "It is beginning to arrange itself, mon ami. One must simply step back and look not at the movement, but at the pauses between." "You mean the lies?" Hastings whispered. Poirot smiled faintly. "I mean the silences, Hastings. The carefully constructed gaps. What is left unsaid is always more dangerous than what is spoken aloud." They reached Celeste's door. The name still hung in gold script on the placard. Poirot placed his fingers on the handle and breathed in. "Let us see," he murmured, "what ghosts Mademoiselle Allard has left behind." And with that, he stepped inside. The air inside Celeste Allard's dressing-room was still, too still, as if something vital had been pulled from the space, leaving behind a pristine hollow. It smelled faintly of rosewater and powder, mingled with something cooler and less identifiable, a trace of unease. Poirot stepped lightly over the threshold, his sharp eyes already scanning the corners, the furniture, the walls. Hastings entered behind him and shut the door, muffling the distant murmur of the gathered company. The room was elegant, though modest. A large mirror surrounded by bulbs dominated the far wall. Below it sat a white vanity, cluttered with cosmetics, hairpins, and perfume bottles. A chaise longue rested beneath the single window, and to the left was a slender wardrobe of lacquered birch. "Everything's in its place," Hastings observed. "No sign of a struggle." "Ah," Poirot said softly, "but do not be fooled by appearances, mon ami. Order can often be a mask, a carefully arranged illusion." He moved toward the vanity. The surface bore the unmistakable pattern of a life interrupted. Rouge uncapped, a lipstick rolled halfway out, a comb placed askew. Poirot crouched slightly, examining a compact mirror. A single smudge on the glass caught his attention, not from powder, but as if someone had pressed a finger there absently, mid-thought. He turned toward the small chest of drawers beneath the dressing table. Opening the bottom drawer, he found tights, folded ballet slippers, a few silk scarves. Behind these, pushed far to the back, was a small stack of envelopes bound by a red silk ribbon. "Voilà," Poirot murmured, sliding them out with care. The letters, just as Mademoiselle Delphine described. He untied the ribbon, carefully opening the top envelope. Inside was a single sheet of parchment, its content handwritten in ink, precise and slightly slanted. "You shine too brightly. The flame that draws every eye also draws the blade. Be careful whom you outdance." Poirot read it twice, then a third time. The paper was unmarked otherwise. No signature, no postmark. "There are more," he said, sifting through them. Each one bore a different variation of the same message. Warnings, jealousy barely veiled. No crude threats, but menace implied, always wrapped in elegant phrasing. A mind behind these letters, he thought, that preferred shadows over confrontation. Someone who knew words intimately. "Why not go to the police?" Hastings asked, peering over his shoulder. "She did not want attention," Poirot replied. "Or perhaps she thought she knew the author, and feared the consequences of revealing it." He placed the letters carefully on the vanity and turned his attention to the wardrobe. Inside hung several costumes, mostly practice wear, but tucked in a garment bag was the dress she had worn the night of her disappearance. He unzipped it slowly, revealing white tulle with silver beadwork across the bodice. It shimmered faintly in the light, delicate and weightless. Then something odd. Along the inner lining of the bodice, just beneath the seam of the left sleeve, Poirot noted a fray. He leaned closer and saw the faintest residue of something sticky. Sap? Resin? No. He touched it and felt a faint pull on his finger. Glue, industrial grade, and recent. Poirot's brow creased. He moved quickly now, checking the seams of the dress, the hem, the hidden folds. Near the back of the skirt he found it, a thread, taut, nearly invisible unless the light caught it at just the right angle. A filament, possibly nylon, trailing downward. "Follow this, Hastings," he said, his voice clipped with intensity. The two of them traced the filament across the carpet, out the dressing-room door, down the corridor, and there it ended, abruptly, in a snarl beside a supply closet. Poirot crouched. The thread had been severed with precision. "Mon Dieu," he whispered, more to himself than to Hastings. It was no trap door. It was suspension, controlled descent. Hastings blinked. "You think they lifted her? With the dress itself?" Poirot nodded. "She did not fall. She was pulled, upward, and out of sight, just as she left the stage lights. But how would no one notice? Because it was timed perfectly," Poirot said. "Executed in the 1 second the audience's breath caught, and Etienne turned away." Poirot rose slowly. "She may not have vanished willingly, but she did not vanish alone." Back in the dressing room, Poirot returned to the letters. He picked up the final envelope, thicker than the others. Inside was a photograph, not of Celeste, but of another woman, slightly older, similar in coloring. She wore a different costume entirely, darker, more severe. On the back, scrawled in the same hand as the letters, was a single phrase. "She was first, but you will be last." Poirot's eyes narrowed. This is no idle jealousy," he murmured. "This is a pattern." He tapped the photograph. "We must know who this woman is. She may be key to everything." "I can ask Madame Lavigne," Hastings offered. "Number better that we speak with someone who knew Celeste intimately. Delphine. Or better yet, Elise." He straightened, sliding the photo into his coat pocket. "Let us return," Poirot said, brushing his lapel. "But we must tread carefully now. Whoever orchestrated this, they believe they are clever. Let us hope they have not yet realized they are playing against Hercule Poirot." They left the dressing room in silence. As they walked down the corridor, a figure appeared at the far end, Elise Moreau, arms crossed, her eyes narrowed as if she'd been waiting. "You've been in there a while," she said coolly. "Find anything useful?" Poirot inclined his head. "That depends, mademoiselle, on whether you are ready to be useful yourself." She smirked faintly. "I told you, I wasn't close to her." Poirot raised a brow. "Then perhaps you can tell me who this is." He held out the photograph. Her expression changed. Not surprise, but something guarded, as though she recognized the face, but hadn't expected to see it again. "That's—" She hesitated. "That's Natalia Rousseau. She used to dance here. Before Celeste. Years ago." "Why did she leave?" "She didn't," Elise said slowly. "She disappeared." Hastings and Poirot exchanged a glance. "And no one found her?" Poirot asked. "There were rumors. She'd had an affair with someone important. Then she was gone. Everyone assumed she left the country, or that she couldn't handle being replaced." Poirot looked down at the photo once more. The resemblance was not perfect, but there was a connection. Same poise, same fire behind the eyes. "Merci, mademoiselle," Poirot said. "You have been most helpful." She shrugged, then turned and walked away. Poirot watched her go. "I think," he said softly to Hastings, that we are not chasing a single disappearance, but a chain. One dancer vanished quietly, and no one questioned it. Now another has vanished, this time before hundreds. He turned toward the staircase, and whoever is behind it has grown bolder. They returned to the theatre's main lounge just as the afternoon sun slid across the tall windows, casting long, angular shadows across the parquet floors. Poirot moved without haste, but with the unmistakable precision of a man arranging the final pieces of a puzzle he already half saw. Hastings followed a step behind, still shaken by the implication that Celeste's disappearance might not be an isolated event. In the foyer, most of the company still lingered, though their energy had shifted. The earlier tension of a formal gathering had given way to strained chatter and sidelong glances. Word of Poirot's quiet discoveries had begun to spread, if only through the nervous intuition of those who sensed his calm was not idle. Madame Lavigne approached them, her voice low. "Anything?" Poirot offered a small, deliberate smile. "Oh, madam, always something. The key is deciding whether it is the true note in the melody or merely the echo." He glanced toward the far end of the room, where Delphine Laurent sat alone now, her legs crossed tightly at the ankle, her hands clenched in her lap. He approached without warning, his steps nearly silent. "Pardon, mademoiselle," he said. "I wonder if I might trouble you further." Delphine looked up, startled. "Of course, Monsieur Poirot." He sat beside her, folding his hands in his lap. "You were close to Mademoiselle Allard, no? You knew her moods, her habits. Did she ever speak to you of another dancer? Natalia Rousseau?" Delphine's eyes widened a fraction. "Natalia? Yes, I think she mentioned her once." "In what context?" "She said she reminded her of herself," Delphine replied slowly. "That they both danced as if time were running out. I thought it was just poetic talk. You know how Celeste was." Poirot nodded. "And was she afraid?" Delphine hesitated. "I don't think she would have admitted it. But yes, I think she was. Not just of whoever was sending those letters, of something larger, a kind of pressure that never let up." "She confided in you?" "Only in fragments," Delphine whispered, as if she were piecing something together herself. "She told me once, 'If anything happens to me, look to the past, not the present.'" I didn't understand what she meant. Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Did she ever speak of Lord or Lady Charpentier?" "Not really," Delphine said. "Though Lady Eugenia gave her a necklace once, a sapphire. It caused quite a stir backstage." "Why?" "Because it was far too expensive for a gift," Delphine said. "Rumors started, about patronage, about favoritism. Celeste returned it the next day." "Interesting," Poirot murmured. "And the Lord?" Delphine hesitated again. "He didn't like her. That much was obvious." Poirot rose slowly. "Merci, mademoiselle. You have told me more than you think." He turned to Hastings, his voice hushed. "We must speak to Lady Eugenia. Now there is something beneath the surface between her and Celeste. An intimacy, perhaps, or something meant to look like one." "She didn't attend today," Hastings reminded him. "No, but she is in Paris, and the Charpentiers reside just off the Rue de l'Université. Come." Within 20 minutes, they were seated in a drawing-room of old money, all cream upholstery, dusty portraits, and a faint scent of lavender and thyme. Lady Eugenia Charpentier entered with regal grace, dressed in dove grey and pearls. She greeted them with a cool, practised smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, "I cannot imagine what more there is to ask. My husband and I are as bewildered as anyone." "But not," Poirot said delicately, "as uninvolved as you claim. You gifted Mademoiselle Allard a sapphire necklace." Her brows arched. "A token. Celeste was brilliant. I admired her." A gift worth several thousand francs? She did not flinch. It meant nothing. I simply wanted to support her. There was nothing improper about it. And yet she returned it. She said it made her uncomfortable, Lady Eugenia said crisply. Said she didn't want to owe anyone anything. Poirot studied her. And did you? Did I what? Expect her to owe you. Lady Eugenia's gaze held his, unwavering. No. Poirot nodded slowly. May I ask, madame, did you know Natalia Rousseau? Something passed across her face. Just a flicker, a tightening of the eyes. She danced here, she said after a pause. Briefly. She disappeared. So I heard. Celeste bore a resemblance to her. Perhaps, Lady Eugenia said coolly. Poirot leaned forward slightly. Madame, forgive me for being bold, but I believe you saw in Celeste not only talent, but a memory, a reflection. She stiffened, but said nothing. Poirot pressed softly. Was Natalia close to your family? She stood suddenly. Monsieur Poirot, I am not in the habit of revisiting ghosts. If you believe I can help your investigation, I will do so, but I will not indulge in poetic diversions. Poirot stood as well, offering a gracious bow. Then I thank you, madame, and I assure you, I do not indulge. I only arrange facts, like pieces on a chessboard. Back in the car, Hastings said quietly, she was hiding something. Oui, Poirot replied, but whether it is shame or guilt remains to be seen. There is history here, Hastings, and I fear Mademoiselle Allard stumbled upon it. They returned to the theatre at dusk. The company had begun to disperse. Poirot asked to speak again with Claude Leroux, the technical director. They met in the wings of the darkened stage. Leroux was holding a coil of cable, his face unreadable in the gloom. You said the Undercroft was sealed, Poirot began. It is, Leroux replied. Solid concrete, no access. But could someone have reopened it, even temporarily? Leroux hesitated. Not without tools or planning. Poirot stepped closer. Then tell me, monsieur, how many people in this company know the old blueprints? Leroux stared at him for a long moment, then said, Only me and Carol. The financier? Leroux nodded. He oversees the property. It's part of his investment. Poirot's eyes glinted. Did he know of Natalia Rousseau? I don't think so, Leroux said. He came on years later. Poirot inclined his head. Merci, monsieur. That is all for now. As they walked back through the corridor, Hastings said, You're circling something, Poirot. Yes, my friend, Poirot replied. I am circling the truth, but I must not land too soon. He stopped suddenly and turned to Hastings. We need to see the insurance policy. What? The one Caron took out on Celeste. Hastings frowned. You think he's involved? I think he is desperate, Poirot said softly. And desperation makes a man forget that dancers do not disappear. They are made to. He continued down the hallway, his step brisk now. Come, Hastings. The pattern is forming. Soon we shall have all the dancers in place. And then, then the final pirouette will belong to Hercule Poirot. The following morning broke over Paris with a quiet greyness, the kind of muted light that turns stone to silver and casts long, reflective shadows, even in the narrowest streets. Poirot arrived at the offices of La Belle Étoile Production just before 8, a time when most of the world had yet to unbutton itself from sleep. But Hercule Poirot, immaculate as always, believed in early moments. It was in those moments, he often said, that secrets breathed more freely. Caron's office occupied the top floor of a modest building adjacent to the theatre itself. The brass plaque on the door had been polished so thoroughly it gave off a distorted reflection. Poirot raised a gloved hand and knocked. It was Caron himself who opened the door. His face registered surprise. Monsieur Poirot, I didn't expect you this early. Ah, but you are here, Monsieur Caron, so clearly it is not too early for business. Caron forced a thin smile. I suppose not. Please, come in. The office was spare but elegant. Leather-bound ledgers lined one shelf, and a large safe stood discreetly against the far wall. Caron gestured to a chair, but Poirot remained standing, inspecting the framed prints on the wall. Vintage posters of past productions, many with names Poirot did not recognize.
Then we'll pay him a final visit. The truth, it seemed, had begun to move faster than the shadows, and someone, very soon, was going to be exposed in full light. It was just past 11 when we arrived at the Corinthian Club, a brooding, colonnaded fixture on Pall Mall, whose silence belied the influence concentrated within. The doorman, accustomed to discretion but not intimidation, hesitated as Holmes produced a card bearing no official authority and a name that rang like a distant echo in such circles. "We must speak with Sir Felix Harrowgate," Holmes said in a tone that brooked no delay. "You will inform him that Mr. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson request an immediate audience. It pertains to a matter of discretion and consequence." The man vanished into the velvet-lined interior without further question. We waited in the outer vestibule, the faint smell of cigars and mahogany curling out from the room beyond. A minute passed, then 2. When the doorman returned, his expression was unreadable. "Sir Felix will receive you." The library. He led us down a narrow corridor to a private room panelled in walnut, dimly lit by a single shaded lamp. Sir Felix stood by the hearth with a brandy in hand, his posture taut. He did not offer seats. "You said this was urgent." Holmes inclined his head. "It is." Sir Felix said nothing, his face carved into stillness. Holmes stepped forward, slow and deliberate. "The painting survives. That much you know. What you may not know is that it was hidden by Fanshawe not to expose you, but perhaps to shield someone else. He died before we could ask why." Sir Felix's eyes flicked to me, then back to Holmes. "You expect me to confess something?" "I expect you to understand, Sir Felix," Holmes said, "that events have passed beyond your control. You sent Claridge to erase the trail. He failed. Lavinge is alive. We have the portrait, and your wife, though she has said nothing, knows more than you suspect." Sir Felix drained the last of his drink in a single motion. "She always knew more. That was the problem." Holmes raised a brow. "Then it was not merely the scandal you feared." He turned from the fire and set the glass down. "The painting didn't just reveal her face, it revealed me." There was a pause. I looked at Holmes, uncertain. "My marriage," Harrowgate said, voice low, "was a transaction. Connections, families, appearances. I admired her, yes, but that intimacy, the one Lavinge captured, I never had it. That portrait made it visible. To me, to the world, she was his in ways she never was mine, and I could not bear it." "You tried to bury the image," Holmes said softly. "But it wouldn't stay buried." He nodded once, stiffly. "I paid for silence, for disappearance, and still it returned. When Claridge told me Fanshawe had it, I panicked. I ordered him to act, but I did not tell him how far to go." "Did you meet with—"
And she was staring down at the stage with the kind of intensity that suggests memory rather than observation. Poirot approached quietly. "Mademoiselle Moreau," he said, "forgive the intrusion." She didn't look at him. "It's fine." "You were fond of this theatre?" "I was born backstage," she replied. "My mother sewed costumes for 20 years. And now you stand in the shadow of the prima ballerina." Elise looked at him then. "You think I envied her?" Poirot raised a hand. "I think you watched her closely. That is not envy, necessarily." "I knew she had secrets," Elise said quietly. "The letters were only part of it. Sometimes she would come in late, with her hair damp, as if she'd been swimming." "Swimming? There's an old maintenance pool beneath the building," she explained. "They say it was built when the original structure was part of a spa before the war. It's been sealed off for decades, but Celeste said she found a way in. She said it helped her think. Poirot's brow furrowed. The Undercroft. Leroux said it was sealed. Elise shrugged. Maybe he didn't know. Or maybe he did. Poirot turned sharply to Hastings. Get Leroux. Now. Within minutes, Claude Leroux was summoned to the orchestra pit. Poirot's demeanour had shifted subtly, still polite, but with a simmering tension beneath his precision. Monsieur Leroux, he said, you told me the Undercroft was sealed. And yet I now hear of a forgotten pool, accessible to Mademoiselle Allard. Leroux's jaw tightened. I didn't think it was relevant. Oh, but it is, Poirot said. When a woman disappears with no visible escape, one must look to the unseen paths. I believe Mademoiselle Allard did not vanish upwards as I thought, but down. Leroux's face gave nothing, but there was something else. His silence stretched just a moment too long. I want access to that space, Poirot said firmly. Leroux exhaled. There's a trapdoor in the storage corridor. I keep it padlocked. Then unlock it. They followed him down a narrow corridor behind the wardrobe department, where the air grew cooler and damp. At the far end, half covered by crates, was a rusted iron ring embedded in the floor. Leroux knelt and unlatched a padlock, then heaved the hatch open. A set of narrow stone steps descended into darkness. Moisture clung to the walls, and the smell of mildew rose up like memory. Poirot descended first, Hastings close behind, with Leroux following. At the base, a faint pool shimmered in the filtered light from a grated window above. The chamber was silent, except for the occasional drip of water echoing into stillness. Poirot's eyes moved across the space. Something was wrong. Then he saw it, a scrap of white silk, torn and waterlogged, clinging to the edge of the pool. And beside it, faint impressions in the mossy concrete. Footprints, smaller than a man's, angled as if someone had tried to pull away. Poirot crouched, inspecting the marks, then looked up sharply at Leroux. She was here, he said. You knew. Leroux shook his head. I didn't touch her. I swear. I only... Poirot stood, cutting him off. You lied. I panicked, Leroux said hoarsely. I didn't know where she'd gone, but I knew she used this place. And if I told the police... You were complicit in hiding the truth, Poirot said. Whether you helped her or someone else used your silence, you are no longer a bystander. Leroux's hands trembled. I didn't kill her. I swear it. Poirot turned away. Then pray, monsieur, that someone else does not prove otherwise. He stared into the dark water, as if expecting her reflection to rise. She is close, he murmured. Not gone. Not yet. Then, almost to himself, but someone wanted her silent, as they wanted Natalia before her, and the final act is still being written. The descent into the Undercroft had left Poirot with a cold knot of certainty in his chest. Not fear, but precision. He had felt it before, many times, that moment when the puzzle stopped being theory and began closing like a jaw. What he had seen, the footprints, the torn silk, the deliberate concealment, confirmed it. Someone had staged a disappearance, and someone else had ensured that the means remained hidden. Back in the theatre's upper hall, Poirot paused by a tall window that overlooked the alley, where the rear entrance opened onto a private loading bay. Hastings joined him a moment later, brushing damp moss from his coat sleeve. She was taken there, Hastings said quietly. Dragged, maybe. Oui, possibly, Poirot murmured. But not in panic, in order. There was no mess, no blood, no rush. The trapdoor was locked, but the lock is only useful if no one knows you have the key. You think Leroux is the one? Number, I think Leroux is afraid, but not of the police, of someone else, someone who has done this before and believes they can do it again. Poirot's eyes shifted to the main corridor. I think it is time we remind our players that not all masks are invisible. It is time we begin the game. That afternoon, Poirot made an unexpected announcement. He requested the presence of the entire company on stage for a reconstruction. A theatrical word, he said, with a delicate smile, for clarity. Madame Lavigne agreed, if reluctantly, and word was sent out that the principal cast, stage staff, and selected guests, including Caron and the Charpentier, were to be present at 4 p.m. By 10 minutes past, the company had gathered in a quiet murmur of confusion. Some stood stiffly, others leaned against the wings. Etienne Laval paced near the edge of the stage, arms folded, while Elise stood silently behind him, eyes unreadable. Poirot entered from the house, stepping with quiet purpose up to the apron. He did not greet them at first. Instead, he turned slowly, surveying the space as if it were a painting, his head tilting ever so slightly. Then he turned to face them. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, "thank you for your patience. What I ask today is simple. A repetition, not of the crime, non, that would be too crude, but of the scene, the final movement of La Danse de l'Ombre. You remember it, do you not? The great leap, the final act before the curtain fell, and all of Paris gasped." There was no reply. Poirot gestured to the center of the stage. "Etienne, if you please, show us where you stood." Etienne moved, not hesitating, but with the air of someone indulging a performance. "Here," I turned to face the backdrop, left arm raised. "And Elise, as understudy, you have rehearsed the same choreography. If Celeste had not performed, you would have taken her place." "Yes," Elise said carefully. "Then you know her final position." She nodded. Poirot stepped aside. "Demonstrate it, if you would." There was a beat of hesitation, and then Elise crossed to center stage. She lifted her arms, the motion precise, her weight on the ball of her foot. It was not a leap, merely the preparation. The gesture alone was haunting. "Now," Poirot said quietly, "imagine the leap. Imagine that in mid-air, a thread catches at your back. You are drawn upward, not by choice, but by plan." A ripple of unease passed through the group. Poirot circled the stage. "Now imagine that someone, watching from the wings, times it all perfectly. They do not see the dancer, they see a mechanism, a trigger, the right light cue, the right distraction, and in the breath between applause and silence, they pull, not a curtain, but a life." Delphine Laurent gasped softly. Etienne glanced over his shoulder. Elise did not move. Poirot stopped. "And this person," he continued, "has done it before. Natalia Rousseau, a different dancer, a different season, but the same method, the same vanishing act." The silence was thick now. Caron shifted uncomfortably. Madame Lavigne stood frozen. Poirot turned to the shadows in the wings. "Do you know what I find most interesting?" he asked. "It is not the thread, not the pool beneath the stage, not even the insurance. It is the letters, the ones sent to Celeste. Beautiful, precise, cruel, and always written in the same hand. A hand familiar with rhythm, timing, and structure. A performer's hand, a writer's hand." He let the words fall into the hush. Then he looked directly at Elise. "You knew Natalia Rousseau." Her expression didn't change, but her shoulders did, a fractional drop, like a tension uncoiled. "I was a child," she said finally. "She was a star. Everyone knew her. She was your sister." Now the shift was visible, a collective intake of breath. Elise didn't answer. Poirot stepped closer. "The resemblance, the disappearance. You watched it happen. Perhaps not directly, but you were here. And years later, you watched Celeste rise, and you hated her." "She didn't deserve it," Elise whispered. "She stole Natalia's spotlight. She never knew what it cost. She danced like nothing had ever gone wrong in the world." "You wrote the letters," Poirot said gently. "Not to threaten her, but to remind her. You wanted her to feel hunted." "I wanted her to see," Elise hissed. "To know that fame is not always earned. Sometimes it's bought. given by women like Eugenia Charpentier, who think their affection can make someone untouchable. Poirot turned toward the audience. And yet, he said, you didn't kill her, because you still wanted the moment. You wanted her to vanish like Natalia. A statement, a performance. Elise didn't reply. Poirot's voice softened. But someone else did not want a performance. Someone wanted silence, and saw in your obsession an opportunity. Now he turned slowly, his eyes moving past Elise, past Caron, until they landed on Lord Charpentier. Your lordship, he said, Natalia Rousseau was more than a dancer to you, was she not? Charpentier scoffed. I've heard enough of this theatre melodrama. Poirot took a step forward. She was your mistress, and she threatened to expose you, not only to your wife, but to the society that fed your wealth. When she vanished, no one looked too closely. Just another lost girl. Charpentier's face remained impassive, but his hands had curled into fists. And then Celeste, Poirot said, his voice low, with the same fire, the same face, the same potential for scandal. Only this time, your wife had taken an interest, given her gifts, raised her profile. You think I harmed her? Charpentier snapped. You think I climbed down into the dark like a rat and dragged her away? No, Poirot said. You had someone do it for you. He looked toward the shadows at stage right. From them, Claude Leroux stepped forward. Enough, he said hoarsely. I didn't mean for it to go that far. The room was still. Poirot nodded. You staged it. Elise provided the thread, the timing, the memory, but you gave it purpose. You believed you were protecting your patron, your livelihood. Leroux looked at Elise. She said it would just scare her, just make her go away. Poirot stepped back, his voice calm. You used art as a weapon. You forgot that the stage remembers everything. Leroux said nothing. Poirot turned away. Hastings, he said softly, call Inspector Varin. And the curtain, for the first time in days, began to close. The theatre emptied slowly after the confrontation, the cast dismissed in hushed tones, their faces pale and unreadable. Inspector Varin arrived with 2 uniformed officers, and Claude Leroux was led away without resistance, Elise trailing behind him with a strange glassy calm in her eyes, as though the storm she had carried for years had finally passed through her. Poirot stood in the centre aisle, unmoving, gazing at the spot on stage where Celeste Allard had once stood for her final leap. Hastings lingered beside him, hesitant to break the silence. That's it, then, Hastings finally said. It's over? No, mon ami, Poirot replied, not turning. It is not over. It is merely changed. Hastings frowned. But you exposed Elise. Leroux confessed. What else is there? Poirot's brow furrowed slightly. Too much. That is precisely what troubles me. Confession is not always truth. Sometimes it is survival. He turned toward Hastings with the sharpness of a man who had just spotted a sliver of glass in a sea of marble. Tell me, what did Leroux not say? Hastings blinked. I'm not sure I follow. He confessed to staging the mechanism, yes, but he did not explain how Celeste vanished from the moment of the lift, where she went, nor what became of her after the descent. You think she's still alive? Poirot's voice was low. I think we've been shown the shape of the crime, but not the core. The players were manipulated, but the playwright remains unseen. Just then, a young constable hurried down the aisle toward them, his face pale. Monsieur Poirot, he said, catching his breath. You must come quickly. There's been a development. Poirot did not need to ask what kind. He simply nodded and followed. They were taken not to the theatre, but to the grounds behind it, down a narrow alley, past the bins and storage crates, to a wooden service door behind the costume department. The constable unlocked it, revealing a stairwell leading to the same undercroft chamber they had visited before. Only this time, It was not empty. In the far corner, lying against the cold concrete wall, was Celeste Allard. Her skin was pale but unmarked, her white costume muddied and torn at the hem. Her hands were bound loosely with costume ties. She stirred slightly as the light fell over her. Poirot moved swiftly to her side, his breath catching not in surprise but in vindication. She was alive, barely conscious, but alive. "Celeste," he said softly, "Mademoiselle Allard, you are safe now." She opened her eyes with effort. Her gaze roamed the space, disoriented, until it landed on Poirot. Then, with sudden clarity, she flinched. "No, no, don't let him back in here." "Who?" Poirot asked quickly, gently taking her hand. "Who did this to you?" She was trembling now, voice hoarse. "He said I had to disappear, that I'd become inconvenient." Poirot's tone sharpened. "Who? Was it Leroux?" She shook her head slowly, eyes brimming. "Not him. He helped, but it wasn't his plan. He was scared. He thought he owed whom, Celeste?" But she was already slipping back into unconsciousness, her body sagging against the while Poirot stood, his face grave. "We must get her to a hospital," he said to the constable. "Immediately." As they carried her out, Poirot remained behind a moment longer, scanning the space. A lantern still burned faintly near the far wall. A water bottle lay unopened beside a tin plate of uneaten food. Whoever had kept her here had done so deliberately, not to kill, but to keep her hidden. He looked up at the ceiling, noting the faint outlines of pipes and old ventilation shafts. "She's been kept here since the night of the performance," he said aloud, "but someone visited her, often." Hastings stared at him. Then who's behind all of it, if not Leroux? Poirot's mind was already moving. Leroux had the means, yes, but not the motive. He feared exposure. Elise had the motive, but not the cruelty to imprison someone she envied. "No, Hastings, there is someone else, someone above all this, someone with the reach, the funds, the fear of scandal, someone who benefits not from murder, but from silence." Realization struck them both at once. "Charpentier," Hastings said. Poirot nodded slowly. He orchestrated it. He had the most to lose. Natalia Rousseau was the first threat, Celeste the second. Leroux was merely a tool, Elise a distraction. But Charpentier? He turned toward the steps. "We must speak to Lady Eugenia. At once." By the time they arrived at the Charpentier residence, the sun had nearly set, and the sky bled into shades of deep violet. The butler recognized Poirot immediately and did not hesitate to admit them. He led them through the foyer and up to the private parlor. Lady Eugenia stood at the window, hands clasped tightly. She turned at the sound of their approach, her eyes tired and lined with something more than age. "You've found her," she said simply. Poirot's expression did not soften. "You knew she was alive." Lady Eugenia did not answer. "You knew," he continued, "because your husband told you, or perhaps because you arranged it yourself." A flicker of emotion passed across her face. Pain, perhaps, or regret. "I tried to protect her," she said, "when I saw how he looked at her, the same way he once looked at Natalia. I tried to keep my distance, but she reminded me too much." "You gave her the necklace," Poirot said. "Was it a warning?" "Number A promise, that she could be more than a pawn." Her voice trembled. "But Benedict, when he saw me showing her kindness, he panicked. He thought I was preparing her for some role, some replacement. He's never believed I forgave him for Natalia." "Did you?" Hastings asked quietly. Eugenia gave a bitter smile. "Number. But I lived with it." Poirot stepped closer. "He used Leroux, paid him, I suspect, to create the illusion. But you knew she hadn't left. You knew where she was kept." She looked away. "I didn't know at first," she whispered. "But I began to suspect the locked Undercroft, The lies, the way Benedict changed when you arrived. And yet you said nothing. Her silence was confirmation. Poirot straightened his cuffs. You allowed a girl to be imprisoned to protect a man who never earned your loyalty. She's alive, Lady Eugenia said softly. Isn't that what matters? Poirot's gaze was cold. No, madame. What matters is why she almost wasn't. They left in silence. Outside, the lamps flickered to life along the boulevard. Poirot stopped at the edge of the Charpentiers' estate and turned to Hastings. The game is over, he said, but the stage remains. Do we inform the authorities about Lord Charpentier? Poirot nodded. We inform them of everything. His money cannot wash the truth away. Not this time. They stood together for a moment in the dusk, listening to the faint sounds of Paris waking into its evening rhythm. Hastings finally asked, And what about Celeste? Poirot's eyes turned toward the dark rooftops above. She will recover. She will dance again. But she will never leap blindly. And that, mon ami, is the curse of truth. The next morning arrived with a sharpness in the air, as if the city itself had grown more alert, more watchful. A light drizzle pattered against the window panes of Poirot's suite at the Hôtel Le Phénix, painting the glass with streaks that blurred the rooftops of the city beyond. Inside, all was still, except for the meticulous movements of Hercule Poirot as he adjusted the angle of his tie in the mirror. His expression was unreadable, save for the faintest narrowing of the eyes. Hastings sat in a nearby armchair, sipping coffee and watching him with increasing curiosity. You haven't said much this morning. Poirot nodded absently. No, because now, mon ami, we begin not with discovery, but with arrangement. Arrangement? Oui, Poirot said, turning from the mirror. The pieces are on the board. Most have revealed themselves, but one piece, has moved too cleanly. It has evaded the eye. Hastings set down his cup. I thought Charpentier was the last player. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Charpentier is the hand behind the curtain, but even the hand must wear a glove. Someone else has been too present, too helpful in silence. Hastings tilted his head. You mean Lady Eugenia? Number she is not innocent, but her guilt is reactive, not orchestral. I mean someone who has remained close enough to observe, yet removed enough to escape notice. Someone whose presence has always seemed reasonable, essential even. He picked up his notebook from the side table and flipped to a page halfway through. On it were 2 columns, names on the left, qualities on the right. Poirot ran his finger down the list until he reached the final line. You remember the photograph in Celeste's drawer? He asked. Of Natalia Rousseau? Of course. It was signed with a sentence. She was first, but you will be last. I considered it a warning, but it was also a statement of intent. The author believed they were closing a cycle. Hastings furrowed his brow. Then who wrote it? Poirot held the notebook toward the light. Someone with access to her dressing room, someone trusted by both dancers, someone who, perhaps, mourned Natalia more than anyone, and never forgave. He paused, then looked up. Delphine Laurent. Hastings started. Delphine, but she was timid, nervous. Precisely, Poirot said softly. Too nervous. Every answer calculated to appear innocent, every word measured. She gave me the location of the letters. She hinted at the sapphire necklace. She seemed to offer everything, except herself. But she didn't confess to anything. Because she doesn't believe she did anything wrong, Poirot said. In her mind, she has been enacting justice. Natalia was not just a friend. She was family. Cousin, I suspect. Raised together in the wings of this theatre. Delphine loved her. And when Natalia vanished, when her memory was erased, Delphine made a vow. To punish those responsible, Hastings finished. Poirot nodded. And in Celeste, she saw both a symbol and an opportunity. She encouraged Elise's jealousy. She kept quiet when Leroux expressed doubts, and she ensured Celeste remained vulnerable. Hastings stood slowly. Then she's the last hand. No, Poirot said quietly. She is the first. At noon, Poirot returned to the Théâtre Belle Étoile, requesting a private word with Madame Lavigne in her office. She greeted him with tired elegance, folding her shawl more tightly around her shoulders as she gestured him in. "You've seen the morning papers?" she asked. "They're calling it a miracle. The swan who returned from the dark." Poirot allowed himself a small smile. The press always prefers poetry to precision. She sat, weary. "And is there more precision to be found?" Poirot nodded. "One last detail, the smallest but most telling." He removed the photograph from his coat pocket, the one from Celeste's drawer. Madame Lavigne accepted it delicately, her eyes softening. "Natalia," she murmured. "She had such promise. You were fond of her. I was proud of her." Poirot stepped closer. "Did you know she was Delphine Laurent's cousin?" A pause. Then, "No, I did not. But they were close. As close as anyone backstage ever is. It's a difficult place to keep secrets." Poirot smiled faintly. "Unless you have reason to keep them." Madame Lavigne looked up sharply. Poirot continued. "Delphine loved Natalia. Her disappearance left a void, a quiet rage. I believe that rage was passed down like a costume, from one girl to another. She fed Elise's resentment. She whispered doubt into Leroux's ear. She kept watch. She waited. And what of now?" Madame Lavigne asked. Poirot's voice dropped. "Now she will be invited to tea." That evening, as the sun dipped behind the cathedral towers and the shadows of scaffolding crossed the marble façade of the Palais Garnier, Poirot arranged his final gathering. This time, it was not the Grand Theatre, but a small drawing-room tucked into the gallery of the upper circle. Just enough space for the cast of players, Elise, Caron, Lady Eugenia, Etienne, and at the centre, Delphine Laurent. She arrived last, carrying a small purse and a smile that wavered as she took in the room. Poirot stood at the hearth, his back to the fire, hands folded. "Merci, Mademoiselle Laurent," he said. "I hoped you might come." She hesitated, then sat at the far end of the sofa. Poirot gestured gently to the others. "Everyone here has played their part in what has passed. Some knowingly, some not. But only one among you has known the entire script." He turned to Delphine. "It was you who wrote the letters. You who placed Natalia's photo in Celeste's drawer. You who suggested the thread, the dress, the timing. Not directly, of course. You planted the seeds, watched them grow." Delphine's face paled. "I don't understand." "But you do," Poirot said softly. "You told yourself it was vengeance for Natalia, for her silence. But in truth, it was about control. You shaped the fall of a star. Twice. You wanted Celeste to disappear, not to harm her, but to prove you could do what no one else had. Correct the past." Delphine rose, her voice trembling. "You can't prove any of that." Poirot stepped closer. "The handwriting, mademoiselle, on the letters, on the back of the photograph, matches the stage notes you wrote for Natalia. I found them in the archive. Flourish is identical, and more importantly, motive as elegant as it is tragic." Delphine stood frozen, then finally sank back into the chair. "I didn't mean for her to get hurt," she whispered. "I just wanted her to disappear, like Natalia, to balance the scales." "And in doing so," Poirot said gently, "you nearly destroyed her." Delphine bowed her head. Inspector Varin entered moments later. Poirot gave a quiet nod, and Delphine was escorted out, silent, her fate no longer a mystery. The others filed out in silence, leaving Poirot and Hastings alone by the fireplace. Hastings broke the quiet. So it was her all along. Poirot nodded, the most unassuming, the quiet voice behind the curtain. He lifted the photo one final time and gazed at Natalia Rousseau's eyes. Grief, he said softly, is like a spotlight left burning on an empty stage. It draws moths and monsters. Hastings looked over. Will Celeste dance again? She will, Poirot said, but not for them, not for applause. She will dance to reclaim herself. And as the lights of the city flickered awake in the windows behind them, Poirot folded the photograph and tucked it away. The story had ended, but the stage would remember. It always did. The following evening, the Théâtre Belle Étoile was quiet, but not empty. The lights had been dimmed, save for a soft spotlight resting on center stage. A long table had been set just in front of the orchestra pit, draped in deep red velvet, with chairs arranged in a semicircle. There was no audience, no orchestra, only the key players of the strange ballet that had unfolded over the past week. Inspector Varin sat rigidly at one end of the table, a leather-bound notebook in front of him. Madame Lavigne sat opposite, still wrapped in her shawl, her expression guarded. Caron, Lord and Lady Charpentier, Élise Moreau, Etienne Laval, each seated in silence, each carrying their own tension. Even Claude Leroux, recently released on conditional bail, had been summoned under escort. He looked hollowed out, as if the shadows of the Undercroft had never quite let go of him. Celeste was not present. By Poirot's request, she remained at a quiet retreat outside Paris, recovering. He had sent her a single message that morning. Be still, mademoiselle. Let the truth do its final pirouette without you. Now Poirot stepped onto the stage. There was no applause, of course, only the soft hush of anticipation. He did not speak immediately. Instead, he allowed his gaze to move across the room, taking in each face, each folded hand, each breath held slightly too long. He let the silence expand until it could no longer be endured. Then he spoke. Mesdames et messieurs, thank you for joining me once again. I have called you here not as suspects. No, let us move beyond that, but as witnesses. To a performance, not of dance, but of deception. A faint murmur moved down the line of seats. Poirot's tone remained calm, nearly academic. We have seen the disappearance of a young woman. We have uncovered secrets, resentments, affairs, betrayals. But none of these alone are crimes. They are simply character. It is when such elements are composed together, like instruments in an orchestra, that they create a symphony of motive. He turned to Inspector Varin. You have your confessions. You have Leroux's arrangement of the trapdoor. You have Elise's letters, Delphine's history, and Lord Charpentier's silence. Charpentier shifted in his seat, but said nothing. But allow me, Poirot continued, to show you the full composition, the final arrangement of notes, because, as with any performance, the truth is not in the steps alone, but in the rhythm between them. He turned first to Claude Leroux. You, monsieur, are a technician. You understand mechanics, levers, cables. It was easy for you to rig the mechanism that lifted Celeste from the stage. You believed, or convinced yourself, that it was merely theatre, that no harm would come. Leroux stared down at his hands. But what you did not expect, Poirot continued, was that someone else would use your stagecraft to create a prison. He stepped closer to the table. Élise Moreau, your jealousy made you vulnerable. Your bitterness allowed Delphine to feed you doubt, day after day, until you were no longer certain where your feelings ended and hers began. You believed Celeste had taken something from Natalia, and you wanted to see her fall. Elise opened her mouth to protest, then closed it again. Delphine, Poirot said, voice softening. Yours was the truest grief. But it became something else. You were not satisfied with mourning Natalia. You wanted her absence to be remembered. You wanted Celeste to vanish in the same way, so that the world would finally ask, "Why do our stars go out without a sound?" Delphine looked away, her jaw set. Poirot turned now toward Caron. "You, monsieur, did not engineer the disappearance, but you sensed an opportunity, an insurance policy, signed and sealed only weeks before the incident. You benefited, and yet you played no active role. That is your crime, omission, not orchestration." Caron flushed, but did not deny it. Poirot now faced Lord Charpentier, his voice cooling. "And you, milord, are not a man of accidents. When Natalia Rousseau threatened to expose your affair, she vanished. Quietly, without scandal, you ensured it. And when Celeste Allard appeared, bearing not only her talent, but her face and your wife's favor, you feared history repeating, and so you made sure it would not." Charpentier stood abruptly. "That's outrageous." Poirot's tone did not change. "You did not kill her, but you paid Leroux to stage her disappearance, not knowing, perhaps, that others had already set such a plan in motion. You took advantage of a design already unfolding." Lady Eugenia's voice rang across the space, quiet but firm. "Benedict, did you?" He did not answer. Poirot looked to her next. "You suspected, and when you learned the truth you said nothing. But guilt has a way of curdling the blood, does it not, madame?" She bowed her head. Poirot turned to Inspector Varin. "And now, monsieur, you may ask, where is the proof? The paper trail? The confession signed?" He stepped forward, revealing a small folded letter from his pocket. "It is here. In this letter, written by Delphine Laurent, found in her effects after her arrest. A draft. Never sent, never burned. In it, she names each player, each choice, and above all, her final regret." He placed the letter gently in front of Varin. "It is not justice of the court, perhaps, but it is justice of the heart." For a long moment, no one spoke. The stage was silent. Then Inspector Varin gathered the letter. "We'll proceed with formal charges." He stood and nodded to the officers near the exit. Poirot bowed slightly, then turned back to the assembled group. "You see," he said, "a mystery is not merely a question. It is a mirror. When we look into it, we do not only see the crime, we see ourselves, our envy, our longing, our silence." He descended the stairs from the stage and began walking up the aisle. Behind him, chairs scraped, voices whispered. The performance, at last, had ended. Outside, the rain had begun again, a soft drizzle falling on the cobblestones, mist curling around the gas lamps. Poirot paused beneath the awning, fastening his coat as Hastings stepped beside him. "Well," Hastings said after a moment, "it's finished." Poirot shook his head gently. "Non, Hastings, it is resolved. But such stories never truly finish. They echo, like music played in an empty hall." They walked slowly into the mist, leaving behind the shuttered doors of the theatre, and the truth that had, at last, taken its final bow. The fog that draped itself over Paris the next morning was quiet, as if the city were holding its breath. The Seine moved slowly, a dull ribbon of silver between the rows of buildings, waking into grey light. In his suite, overlooking the river, Hercule Poirot stood in stillness, watching the reflection of street lamps vanish one by one as the dawn overcame them. His suitcase sat neatly packed at the foot of the bed, his gloves and hat arranged with familiar precision beside a cup of untouched coffee. Hastings entered from the adjoining room, already dressed for travel. "The concierge says the train to Calais departs in 2 hours. Poirot nodded, but his gaze did not leave the window. "There is one task left," he murmured, "one that cannot be performed in court, nor in public, but must still be fulfilled." Hastings waited. Poirot turned, then carefully lifted a small envelope from the mantel. Its seal was unbroken. This arrived early, from Celeste. Hastings read his expression. She knows everything? She knows what she needs to know, Poirot said quietly. That she was not simply a pawn, that her pain had meaning, that she was believed. He placed the letter inside his coat and turned with finality. Come, mon ami, let us say goodbye to the last ghost. The car moved through the quiet streets toward a private wing of the Saint-Sulpice convalescent retreat. There, beyond an ivy-covered gate, lay the temporary home of Celeste Allard. No longer the brilliant phantom of the stage, but a recovering woman wrapped in quiet and memory. She was waiting in the garden, seated on a wrought-iron bench beneath a bare-branched linden tree. The wind tugged at her shawl as they approached, but she did not rise. Her gaze lifted to Poirot with calm familiarity. "I knew you would come," she said. Poirot bowed gently. "And I knew you would be here, still standing, still whole." She gave a faint, wry smile. "Is that what I am?" "You are not broken," Poirot replied. "You were caught in a performance too large for any one dancer to resist. But now the curtain has fallen." She said nothing, but her hands fidgeted slightly in her lap. "I dreamed," she said at last, "while I was down there, in the dark. I dreamed of dancing in silence. No music, no audience, only shadow. And I thought, maybe this is what I was always meant for." "No," Poirot said gently. "That was not the truth. That was what they made you feel, the shadow they placed upon you." She looked at him. "And Delphine?" "She will face justice," Poirot said. "But even now she grieves. Her crimes were born of sorrow, not malice." "And Charpentier?" Poirot's expression sharpened slightly. "He will face the court. His influence is waning. His past will not stay buried." Celeste turned back to the linden tree. "And Natalia?" Poirot removed the letter from his coat and held it out. "Delphine's words. She left them for you. In them is her truth, and Natalia's, and your own." Celeste took it slowly, placing it on her lap, but not opening it. Poirot allowed the silence to settle between them before speaking again. "Will you dance again?" She was quiet a moment longer. Then she nodded. "Yes," she said softly. "But never for them. Never again for applause or sponsorship or survival. If I return, it will be for me, for the breath between the movements, for the stillness between the notes." Poirot smiled faintly. "Then you will be magnificent." She looked at him once more. "Thank you." He inclined his head. "No, mademoiselle. Thank you for surviving." They left her there, beneath the tree, her shawl drawn tight, the letter still unopened in her lap. Back in the car, Hastings watched Poirot closely as they drove toward the station. "That was important to you," he said after a moment, "seeing her." "Of course," Poirot said. "A case is not solved when the criminal is caught. It is solved when the wound is closed. Justice without healing is merely arithmetic." They rode in silence for a time, until the train station appeared, its iron arches rising like wings in the haze. As the porter collected their luggage, Hastings asked, "And you, Poirot? What will you take from this?" Poirot paused, then replied quietly, that even in the most graceful performance, cruelty can find a place to hide, that those who smile the quietest often carry the deepest knives, and that sometimes the stage is not a place of light, but a place where shadows learn to dance. The train pulled away from the platform, its whistle cutting through the mist like the first note of a new symphony. Poirot sat by the window, his reflection fading as the city blurred behind them. His hands folded neatly, his thoughts already drifting to other puzzles, other stages. But in his pocket, close to his chest, the final letter from Celeste remained, unopened. A memory sealed not for knowledge, but for reverence, Because in the end, the affair at the disappearing dancer had not been about crime alone. It had been about silence, broken, about fear, named, and about the quiet dignity of a woman who, even when vanishing, refused to be erased. And for Hercule Poirot, that was always the true mystery. Not who committed the crime, but who endured it. The Parisian countryside unfolded beyond the train windows in muted shades of green and grey, a wash of winter's last brushstrokes over a sleeping land. Hercule Poirot sat with his gloved hands folded over his cane, his back straight, his gaze directed not at the passing scenery, but inward, somewhere deeper, into the spaces where memory and meaning gathered quietly, like dust in the folds of a stage curtain. Across from him, Hastings watched him with the quiet deference of an old friend who knew better than to interrupt a final act still playing in the mind. The rhythm of the rails tapped gently beneath them, soothing, precise, like the tick of a finely made clock. After a long moment, Hastings cleared his throat. "I must say, Poirot, this one feels different." Poirot tilted his head slightly, but did not yet reply. "I mean," Hastings continued, "it wasn't just a crime you solved. It was a pattern, a chain of silences. It started long before Celeste." "Ah," Poirot said softly, his accent curling around the syllables. "Oui. You begin to understand, mon ami. The mystery was not simply of how a girl disappeared from a stage. It was how an entire theatre, an entire world, convinced itself not to look, not to ask." He reached into his coat pocket and drew out a folded programme from the Théâtre Belle Étoile, now smoothed and faded from wear. He studied it as though it contained hidden lines only he could see. "This was not only a matter of jealousy," Poirot continued, "nor of financial gain. It was about identity, about the weight of legacy. Natalia Rousseau was not murdered by one hand. She was erased by a system of hands, each too afraid to stop the others. And when Celeste rose, they saw not her, but the memory they buried. But you brought them all to light," Hastings said. Poirot gave a small nod. "One cannot revive the dead, but one can ensure the next shadow does not go unnoticed." He tucked the programme away and glanced toward Hastings with a rare, gentle fondness. "You see, Hastings, in the end, I did not solve a crime. I dismantled a performance, one carefully directed, ruthlessly rehearsed, and performed over years." "And the final act?" Poirot smiled. "The final act, mon ami, was silence. A young woman alone in the dark, believing the world had forgotten her. I could not allow that to be the closing note." The train began to slow as they neared Calais, the final stretch of their journey. The sky outside had begun to clear, faint streaks of sunlight piercing through the clouds like footlights returning after a long blackout. Poirot leaned back in his seat, his expression calm, his posture as precise as ever. "Celeste will return," he said softly. "She will dance again, but this time she will write the choreography herself. That, Hastings, is justice, not simply in the law, but in the spirit." "And Delphine?" Hastings asked after a pause. "Do you believe she truly understood what she had done?" "I believe she understood what had been done to her," Poirot replied. "And in that understanding, she tried to reverse time. But revenge is not time travel, Hastings. It is only repetition, one more act in the same tragedy." They disembarked as the train hissed to a halt, stepping onto the fog-veiled platform, like men leaving a stage behind. Poirot paused once more, adjusting his hat as a light breeze carried the scent of the sea toward them. He turned to Hastings and said, almost as an afterthought, "You know, it is strange." "What is?" Poirot's eyes twinkled faintly. For all the precision of timing, the ropes, the trapdoors, the vanishing acts, in the end, the most important clue was not mechanical at all. It was emotional. Hastings raised an eyebrow. You mean the letters? No, Poirot said. I mean the absence of applause. When Celeste vanished, the audience did not cheer. They did not believe it was part of the show. They knew something was wrong. That instinct, that human moment, was the beginning of the truth. I simply followed it. He stepped forward toward the ferry, leaving Hastings to marvel, not for the first time, at how Poirot had unravelled not merely a mystery, but a darkness sewn quietly into the seams of art, of memory, and of ambition. As they crossed the gangway to the boat, the bells rang out behind them, one last echo from Paris, a city of brilliance and shadow, and with that, the affair of the disappearing dancer was truly over. But the little grey cells of Hercule Poirot would never rest, not while there were stories behind curtains and silences in the wings.